Hello, how are you today? I'm missing being together as a group, but it's so interesting to me that the Lord has given us this way to communicate with each other and to do the things that we have to do and to keep carrying on for His honor and for His glory. You know, I was sitting and I was thinking, it was in 1933 in the month of March that Franklin D. Roosevelt began his fireside chats with people to try and keep their morale up and to try and let them know what was going on and what the government was doing to help and how things were in the state of the world. Well, it is March 2020, and it is not my place to tell you what the world is like, nor what the government is doing, but it is my place to tell you what God thinks about some things, and it is my place to help you learn what I've learned from His Word. So I was contemplating Proverbs that we have been studying, and in Proverbs, the Proverbs were given to us so that we might have a more peaceable life, and so that we might walk through life in a better way and be able to get along with people and ourselves better. And so we're going to be looking tonight at an important subject, which is called Watch Your Words. Are words important to a Christian? Are words important to women? Oh, they absolutely are. Haven't you ever heard that women talk more than men? I don't think that's true across the board, because we have some people who are contemplative, and we have some people who are extroverts and some people who are introverts. But words are important, what we hear and what we say. So I want to share something with you as we ask the question, what's a woman to think about words? I want to share something to you that happened to my daughter, I guess about a year ago. And she wrote about it. I don't know, some of you in class know that my daughter is a writer, and some of you may not be aware of that. But she also took up running, and she took it up as an adult instead of as a child or as a teen. And so she was out and she was running one morning, doing her practice run. And I'm going to read you what happened to her, because it has something to do with words. And this is what she said. For the record, I'm not embarrassed by any of this. I've learned what kind of person I am. One who runs towards screams and bursts through the hedges. I'm also the type, my friends are now telling me, who needs to run with pepper spray. The end. Well, that seemed kind of short, didn't it? But she goes on to tell about what happened. I was running through a cluster of gated communities on the other side of town. I was about 4 miles in, and the sun was just coming up. It was cold, quiet, and misty. A gray haze turning gold as the sun rose. It was early, just after 7, and I had barely seen anyone out and about. The entire neighborhood seemed to sleep. The sound of my shoe scuffing the sidewalk was the only noise. I ran the loop, exited the development, and started to run along the far side of a nearby lake. Then the screaming started. At first, I thought it was a peacock or a crane. Their calls sound like screams. I stopped running. I listened. Only stillness and light chirping of the birds. Then it came again, a high, throaty scream wafting through the misty lake from the neighborhood I just exited. This time I heard it clearly. Help! Help me! I thumbed 911 into my phone and turned, truly running back into the development. The screaming continued at intervals, alternating between high, shrieking wails and cries of, "He's killing me! He's killing me!" I told dispatch I needed the police and attempted to give my location. Hold on. Let me run into the street. Let me run to a cross street. Someone is screaming. Can you hear it? She could not hear it. She could only hear me panting into the phone as I sprinted around the loop looking for a street name. Both streets were named the same thing. Ma'am, are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. I'm starting I'm staring right at the signs. She wanted me to wait at the gate to guide the police. But the screams continued, and there was no way I could stand like a chump and listen to a possible beating, murder. The screams were high, a child's or a woman's, and all I could think was that someone was trying to escape a domestic situation in the early morning. What if the person is killed? I told the operator I was already halfway around the back loop, and they're panting. I did not like this, and I would keep running through the neighborhood to see if I could figure out which house it was. That's when the screaming stopped. I got to the back of the loop and stood there panting. I did not like this at all. I realized they were close. They seemed to be coming from one of the houses I was standing in front of as I heard the screams again. I sprinted between the houses yelling, "Hello, hello, can you hear me?" Voices muffled, quieting, then silence. But I'd figured out where the sounds were coming from. I reached a high hedge and then the silence. I listened again. I shoved through the high hedge. My head and half my torso came through the bushes to see two small children playing in a hot tub. Their wet little heads bobbed above the cloud of steam. "Was that you screaming?" I demanded. Eyes staring around for danger. They did look terrified of me. Their eyes were rounded sets of matching swim goggles. "Yes," the older voice said meekly, "it was us." A woman came out, their grandmother also named Ruth, because why not? And we quickly got things sorted. She was super cool about me suddenly bursting through her hedges and frightening her grandchildren. 9/11 was cool about me calling, and I added a cardio blast to my run. The 9/11 operator asked a bunch of questions and let me hang up when she sensed everything was okay. But then she called back to confirm that I hadn't been pretending because I was threatened. Only then did she cancel the police response. She told me I did a good thing. Do words matter? Absolutely. We're going to navigate through the Proverbs. I'd like you to pause right here, and if you don't have a pencil and paper, you can just stop this video and you can go get them, because if we were in class, I would have us look them up together, and I would ask you a question, and then I would wait a little bit and wait for your response, and we might discuss it. But we can't do that here and now. We aren't able to do that at all. I want you to think about something. God wanted us to know him, and he wanted to know how we think. So he gave us the 10 Commandments. A lot of people think the 10 Commandments are there for us to try and reach heaven, to obey, and to work our way into being a better person. God didn't give us the 10 Commandments exactly for that purpose. He gave them so we could know who he is and what he thinks about life and how he views us in compared to what he wants from us. If you think about the 10 Commandments, the first commandment he gave was, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." That's pretty important. We needed to learn that and to know that he is God Almighty. And the second commandment he gave was to remember his day, the Sabbath day, and to keep it separate from all other days. But then, do you realize what the third commandment is? The third commandment tells us that we are to be careful about our speech. We are to watch our words. I often do this with kids when I talk about the third commandment. Watch your words. God thought words were important. You'd think he might have told us that murder was more important than our words, and he might have put that third, but he didn't. So words are important to God. Now we're going to start with the Proverbs, and we're going to start with the first proverb I want to start with is in Proverbs 10:19, and I want you to listen to it as I read it, and then I want you to read it yourself and consider some things. In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. A lot of words, sin in a lot of words. Well, you know what? Sometimes we talk too much. And when we talk too much, when we get going, if we're frustrated, if we're struggling with someone and talking too much, we do sin. We say things we never meant to say. And yet God says, he who restrains his lips, if you pull back and if you hold back from saying all these things, then you're counted as wise. God wants us to be wise. He wants us to be wise because it helps us walk through this sin-cursed world. The next thing I want you to look at is Proverbs 12:18. And Proverbs 12:18 says, there is that speaketh like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise is health. Our words can pierce like a sword. We can be pierced by others' words. You know, sometimes we think of this and we think merely that it might be foul language that that person is using towards us. We might be thinking that they're taking God's name in vain, and that's exactly what he's talking about. But you know, there are other ways that words can pierce and can hurt. Have you ever had someone say something and then say, just kidding, just kidding? Well, you know what? A lot of people say things, and someone told me once a saying that's remained with me for years and years, and it's, much truth is said in jest. Sometimes a person won't want to come out and say exactly what they're thinking about, but they want you to know. They want you to know something. And so they say it in a kidding manner, but they don't mean it quite in a kidding manner. They just don't want you to respond to them wrongly. And so I've thought of that often. If somebody says something in jest, sometimes I stop and consider what it is they said. Is there something about me that somebody didn't have the heart to tell me? Some way that they thought I needed to be a better person, and yet they just kind of made a joke out of it because they didn't want me to think poorly of them? Well, if we move to Proverbs 13:3, God says something else that has to do with talking too much. He says, he that keepeth his mouth keepeth his life, but he that openeth wide his lips shall have destruction. And that word destruction gives the idea of you ruin yourself. Well, how is that? If I keep my mouth, if I'm careful about what I say, I don't bring myself to ruin? Think about it. Have you ever had somebody start to tell you stuff, and the more they told you, the more you kind of pulled back and thought, whoa, I didn't know you were like that. I didn't know you thought those kind of things. And they didn't even realize what they were saying and exposing about themselves. My family often teases me because when I go to the store, I have lots of people talk to me that I don't even know. In fact, we were standing in a Walmart in St. Mary's, Georgia, and my husband was in front of me, and there was a man behind me, and the man kept talking to the back of my head. And my husband turned around and he said, you know, they even talk to the back of your head? Sometimes people let out all kinds of things about themselves. And the more they talk, the more they bring out things that if they had time to stand and consider what they were saying, they wouldn't have told you those things. So we can see that as a warning to us to be careful about talking too much, to be careful about opening up about everything in our life. The next proverb I want to look at is Proverbs 17:28. It says, even a fool, when he holds his peace, is counted wise, and he that shutteth his lips is esteemed a man of understanding. That word, a man of understanding, can be a man of intelligence. You know, sometimes when someone talks, you have an opinion of them that they're a pretty smart person, and yet when they start to say what they think, you realize they don't really know what they're talking about on this subject. Remember, it said, even a fool when he holds his peace. This was brought back to me once in a board meeting. There was a man who hardly ever spoke. But what I noticed was when he did speak, everybody listened. He waited until the precise time to say what he thought. He didn't jump in with both feet and keep talking and trying to push his way through and push his ideas through. And consequently, people listened to him a lot more. The next proverb I want you to look at is Proverbs 18:13. This really makes me chuckle. He that answereth a matter before he heareth it, it is folly and shame to him. Did you ever have someone you were trying to talk to, and they listened to part of what you said, and then they started to run on and say what they thought about the matter, when in fact, that's not even what you were thinking. That's not even what you were talking about. And then when you point out, well, that's not what's going on here, he became embarrassed. A lot of times we try talking and we try saying things before we have even heard the whole story. Or we might be distracted and we might be talking to someone and we're in a crowd of people and suddenly we're looking around and we're trying to see what's happening with everybody else. And our mind is wandering. This causes grief to a lot of people if we don't care enough to listen to what they're saying. And who does it shame? It shames the person that doesn't listen. Well, there are a lot of words can hurt. Sometimes we say things and we can let something out that gets us into trouble. This is the proverb that says that. Proverbs 21:23. It says, whoso keeps his mouth and his tongue keeps his soul from troubles. If I'm careful about my mouth and my tongue, how do I keep myself from trouble? Well, I sat and thought about each of these proverbs, and I asked the Lord to give me some biblical examples of people who had a problem and who blurted something out and didn't even realize what they were doing. Well, the Lord brought to my mind David. He was to be king. David was to be king, but Saul wasn't going to let him have the kingdom. And Saul was trying to kill him, and he chased David for years. And David kept out of his way. But you know what? David would not kill King Saul himself because he knew that God had anointed him. He was anointed king before God promised the kingdom to David, and David respected that. Well, Saul and his sons are killed in battle. And in 2 Samuel 1, beginning with verse 5, they have been killed. It's been a couple days, and a man rides into the camp and starts to talk to David. And this is how it goes. And David said unto the young man that told him, he's telling him some information about Saul dying. How knowest thou that Saul and Jonathan his son be dead? And the young man that told him said, as it happened by chance upon Mount Gilboa, behold, Saul leaned on his spear, and lo, the chariots and horsemen followed hard after him. And when he looked behind him, he saw me, and he called unto me. So Saul had called this young man to him. And I answered, here am I. And he said unto me, who art thou? And I answered him, I am an Amalekite. And he said unto me again, stand, I pray thee, upon me, and slay me, for anguish is come upon me, because my life is yet whole in me. Now, Saul knew he was dying, but he wanted to die before he was taken captive. And so he asked this young man to do it. And in verse 10 it says, "So I stood upon him," remember he's telling this to David, "and slew him, because I was sure that he could not live after that he was fallen. And I took the crown that was upon his head, and the bracelet that was on his arm, and have brought them hither unto my Lord." Here's the proof, David. Look, I'm the one who did it. Look, I brought you this so you could know that I'm the one. Then David took hold of his clothes, and he rent them. He tore his clothes. It was a sign of grief among the Jews back then. And likewise, all the men that were with him, everybody else, they were all sad that Jonathan and Saul were dead. And they mourned and wept and fasted until even for Saul and for Jonathan his son, and for the people of the Lord, and for the house of Israel, because they were fallen by the sword. They knew that this was going to change everything, and that's why they were mourning. And David said unto the young man that told him, "Whence art thou?" And he answered, "I am the son of a stranger, an Amalekite." He wanted to know where this guy was from. And David said unto him, "How wast thou not afraid to stretch forth thine hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" And David called one of the young men and said, "Go near and fall upon him." And he smote him that he died. He wasn't just saying fall over him. He was saying, you come after him and you kill him because of what he did. And David said unto him, now he's talking to this young man, the one who couldn't keep his mouth closed and brought trouble to his soul. David said unto him, "Thy blood be upon thy head." It's your own fault. "For my mouth hath testified against thee, saying, I have slain the Lord's anointed." Sometimes our own words get us into trouble. And then there's another way. We look at these ways about how we talk too much and how we let things out of our mouth that we shouldn't. But then there's another way. This way in Proverbs 27:2 talks about someone who's a blowhard. "Let another man praise thee, and not thine own mouth, a stranger, and not thine own lips." God tells us, look, if you want praise, don't walk around saying, you know what I did? This is what I did. And you know what? This is why I did it. And aren't I great? And da-da-da-da-da. That sounds like a little child, doesn't it? It certainly does, because that's what little children do. But God gave this proverb to help that little child, to help that adult who has the tendency to want to pat himself on the back, to go more smoothly through life. You know, if we are constantly blowing our own horn, as the phrase goes, and letting everybody know how great we are, a lot of times people avoid us because they know what we're going to do. We're going to tell them how great we are. We're going to be glad they know it, and we want to make sure they know it, and we want to make sure they're going to be able to tell other people who we are and how great we are. And pretty soon people start avoiding the blowhard. Well, there's something else that the Proverbs tell us, and it's a warning to us. It says, "Seest thou a man that is hasty in his words?" Somebody that talks right away, somebody that makes a decision right away. "There is more hope of a fool than him." A foolish person who doesn't jump to conclusions, who doesn't press forward, a foolish person who's not impulsive, there's not much hope for the person that is impulsive, but there's more hope for the fool who isn't impulsive. And I asked the Lord and thought about it and prayed about it, and I started to think of someone that was impulsive, someone that we esteem highly because we thought, wow, he's one of the men that the Lord chose to walk with him when he was here on earth, and his name was Peter. His name was Peter. I like to call him Impulsive Peter. If you turn to John 13:36 and read through it, this is what it says. "Simon Peter said unto the Lord, Whither thou goest? Jesus answered him, Whither I go, thou canst not follow me now, but thou shalt follow me afterwards. Now, all the disciples had been together when this conversation started. Peter said unto him, Lord, why cannot I follow thee now? I will lay down my life for thy sake. He was ready, willing, and able. He just let it out. And Jesus answered him, Wilt thou lay down thy life for my sake? Verily, verily, I say unto thee, the cock shall not crow till thou hast denied me 3 times. Well, if we go on after Jesus is arrested, we see that's exactly what happens. Peter's outside watching and trying to figure out what's going to happen to the Lord. And he's approached and asked if he knows the Lord. And he says no. And he 3 times says no. And the 3rd time, that cock crows. And he's devastated. He realizes what he's done. He's denied the Lord. Sometimes we are so impulsive to do things. We get ourselves in trouble, both with the Lord and with other people. We run ahead of the Lord's will. We run ahead of what everybody else is trying to get us to help with and to be part of. And we take off in a direction not thinking of the consequences. There was another time impulsive Peter acted without thinking. And that was in Matthew 14:27. You'll want to read this and think about Peter and what was happening there. And it says, But straightway Jesus said unto them, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. Well, where were the disciples that they were afraid? They were in a boat, and the seas were rough. And he was telling them not to be afraid because he was with them. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. Now think about it. If you and I were out on the ocean here and the seas were terribly rough, would we want to get out of the boat? No, we'd want to stay in that boat. But Peter was impulsive. He wanted to make sure it was the Lord. And so he was going to ask the Lord that question, and then he was going to follow through. And so Peter asked him, and Peter said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come to thee on the water. And he said, and that would be Jesus, come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. He thought it was Jesus. He was going to see what he could do. And it says next, and there's an important word at verse 30, but. It starts out but. But can be looked this way. On the one hand, you have this. Peter's getting out of the boat. On the other hand, you have this. But when he saw the wind boisterous, okay, he got out of the boat, but man, the wind's overtaking him. The waves are going to overtake him. It says, he was afraid and beginning to sink. He cried, saying, Lord, save me. That was the smartest thing to do at this point. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? Now, we could say, well, he didn't doubt because he got out of the boat and he was going to go to Jesus. But could he have believed that Jesus was who he said he was without getting out of the boat? He could have, but he didn't. And his impulsive nature brought him into danger. Fortunately, Jesus was who he said he was. Fortunately, Jesus was the Lord of all creation, and he was able to take Peter, and he was able to rescue him. Well, we hurt others, and we hurt ourselves when we say cutting words, when we say boastful speech, and impulsive words. But we're just going to take a minute before we end, and we're going to look at words that can heal people and words that can help people. Now, when I talk about healing, I don't mean I'm going to make sure that if you get the COVID-19, these words are going to heal you and you're going to be fine. But we're talking about Words as they affect us inwardly, not physically. Turn to Proverbs 10:19, please. In the multitude of words there wanteth not sin, but he that refrains his lips is wise. Well, we kind of heard that before, didn't we? In the multitudes of words there wanteth not sin. In other words, if you use too many words, if you run at the mouth, if you keep going on, you're not wise, because it says, he that refraineth his lips is wise. And I thought, who was wise? You know who was wise? One of the persons that was wise was Mary, Jesus' mother. When the angel came and told her everything that had happened, what could she have done? She could have run far and wide. She could have gone through the city or the town or wherever she was, and she could have said, guess what? I'm the one that God chose. I'm the one that's going to be able to do this thing. But she didn't. The Bible tells us she pondered all these things in her heart. She kept them to herself. And she was wise in that. If she had run through the streets, people would have thought she was a lunatic. As it was, her husband Joseph knew what he should do. He should put her away, and yet he didn't, because God came and told him he shouldn't. But she was wise in keeping her mouth shut. There's another proverb, and it goes, Proverbs 15:4. A gentle tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit. Have you ever been in an argument and someone comes in and with a few words they're just able to say something in a calm way that seems to settle things down? They seem to say, look, we're going to handle this. We're going to take care of this. A lot of times with our kids, we don't use gentle tongues. We come into the room, and if there's something happening and bickering going on, we jump into it. And our tongue is anything but gentle. But sometimes, if we remember to keep calm and to stay gentle, and to not talk as the other people are talking, we are able to calm things, and we are able to start the road to get that argument squared away and out of the way. Then there's another proverb. He that covereth a sin seeketh love, but he that repeateth a matter separateth very friends. How do we cover a transgression? Well, we don't go on and on about what we know. We don't say, you know what? I've just got to share this with you. This is a prayer request I have for